In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life had always been peaceful. People knew each other by name, children played freely in the streets, and crime was almost unheard of. But beneath this idyllic surface, something sinister brewed, something that would shatter the illusion of safety forever. At the center of it all were two police officers, Detective Mark Rivers and Officer Ryan Cole. On the outside, they appeared to be model cops, confident, authoritative, and respected by many. They wore their badges with pride, patrolled the streets diligently, and even attended community events to boost morale. But behind closed doors, they were anything but honorable. Mark and Ryan had long since abandoned their duty to protect and serve. Instead, they used their positions of power for personal gain, exploiting the very people they were supposed to safeguard. Their corruption began subtly, a bribe here, a favor there, but over time it grew into something far more insidious. They started working closely with local criminals, accepting money in exchange for turning a blind eye to illegal activities. Drug dealers operated openly under their protection, knowing that as long as they paid up, they wouldn't face any trouble. Gamblers ran underground poker games without fear of raids, and thieves walked free after handing over stolen goods or cash. It wasn't just about looking the other way. Mark and Ryan actively participated in these crimes, planting evidence on innocent citizens to frame them for offenses they didn't commit. Their actions created chaos in the lives of countless families, leaving shattered reputations and broken dreams in their wake. No one dared to speak out against them. Fear kept everyone silent. If you crossed Mark and Ryan, bad things happened. Your car might mysteriously catch fire. Your business could suddenly fail due to random inspections. Or worse, you might find yourself locked up for a crime you never committed. Even those who wanted to report them hesitated, believing that no one would believe them. After all, how could anyone accuse two decorated officers of such heinous acts? Who would take on the word of an ordinary citizen over the badge of authority? But then something changed. A young woman named Emily Carter decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. Her younger brother Alex had been arrested weeks earlier on charges of drug possession. According to the police report, drugs were found in his backpack during a routine traffic stop. But Emily knew better. She knew her brother inside and out. He was shy, hardworking, and terrified of getting into trouble. There was no way he'd ever touch drugs, let alone carry them around in broad daylight. Determined to prove Alex's innocence, Emily visited the station to request copies of the arrest records. What she discovered horrified her. The report contained glaring inconsistencies. The dates didn't match, the signatures were forged, and there was no mention of a witness statement from the traffic stop. It was clear that someone had fabricated the entire case. When she confronted Mark and Ryan at the station, demanding answers, they dismissed her with cold indifference. "Your brother's guilty," Mark sneered. "Take it up with the courts, if you don't like it." That moment ignited a fire within Emily. She refused to let her brother rot in jail for a crime he didn't commit. More than that, she realized that if Mark and Ryan could do this to Alex, they could do it to anyone. Someone needed to stand up to them, to expose their lies and hold them accountable. And if no one else was brave enough to do it, she would have to be the one. Emily threw herself into uncovering the truth. She spent hours combing through public records, searching for patterns in past cases handled by Mark and Ryan. She reached out to others who claimed to have been wrongfully targeted, piecing together stories that painted a disturbing picture of systemic abuse. Late nights became her norm as she pored over surveillance footage, court documents, and news articles. Slowly but surely, a web of deceit emerged, one that implicated not only Mark and Ryan, but also several influential figures in the town's government. Her investigation wasn't without risks. As Emily dug deeper, she began noticing strange occurrences. Cars parked outside her apartment for hours, engines running but never moving. Muffled phone calls in the middle of the night, the caller hanging up before she could answer. Shadows lurking near her workplace. At first, she tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the signs grew harder to ignore. One evening, while walking home from a coffee shop where she'd met another victim, She spotted a black SUV trailing her. Heart pounding, she ducked into alleys and zigzagged through side streets, barely managing to lose them. It was terrifying, but it also confirmed what she already suspected. Mark and Ryan knew someone was onto them, and they weren't going to let her get away with exposing their secrets. Despite the danger, Emily pressed on. She understood that taking down corrupt cops wouldn't be easy. It required resources and connections she simply didn't have. So she reached out to a friend of a friend who worked in law enforcement. That decision turned out to be pivotal. The person she contacted had ties to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and once they heard her story, they immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Within days, federal agents were brought in to assist, marking the beginning of a massive operation aimed at dismantling the corrupt network. For Emily, this was just the start of a journey that would test her courage, resilience, and determination. Little did she know that her fight for justice would lead to a courtroom showdown, unlike anything the town had ever seen, and culminate in a jaw-dropping twist that no one could have predicted. Emily's investigation was like walking on thin ice. Every step forward felt precarious. Every clue she uncovered seemed to lead her deeper into a labyrinth of danger and deceit. What started as a personal mission to save her brother had quickly evolved into something much bigger, a fight against a web of corruption that stretched far beyond Mark and Ryan. As Emily pieced together the fragments of evidence, she realized that these two officers weren't rogue individuals operating alone. They were part of a larger, more sinister network. The first major breakthrough came when she met a man named Tom Harris. Tom was an ex-convict who claimed he'd been framed by Mark and Ryan years ago. His story mirrored Alex's in many ways. Drugs planted, fake witnesses brought in, and no real chance at defending himself in court. But what made Tom's case stand out was his detail-oriented memory. He remembered names, dates, and even specific interactions with people higher up in the system. According to Tom, Mark and Ryan worked closely with certain city officials who turned a blind eye to their crimes in exchange for kickbacks. These officials ensured that any complaints filed against the officers disappeared without a trace. Tom handed Emily a folder filled with documents he'd managed to smuggle out during his time in prison. The papers included internal memos, financial records, and handwritten notes detailing bribes paid to politicians and bureaucrats. It was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. For the first time, Emily felt like she had concrete proof, not just hearsay or speculation. However, this newfound confidence was short-lived. The weight of what she was uncovering began to sink in. This wasn't just about exposing two bad cops anymore. She was staring down a powerful machine that would stop at nothing to protect itself. As Emily pored over the documents late one night, her phone buzzed incessantly. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was spam calls or telemarketers. But when she finally picked up after the fifth ring, there was only silence on the other end. Her heart raced. She glanced at the caller ID. It read, "Unknown number." Before she could process what was happening, another call came through almost immediately. Again, silence. Then, abruptly, a distorted voice whispered, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Emily froze. Her hands trembled as she ended the call. Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, a warning from Mark and Ryan? She tried convincing herself it was nothing, just nerves playing tricks on her, but deep down she knew better. Someone was watching her. Someone didn't want her to keep going. The next day, things escalated. When Emily left her apartment to grab coffee, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its engine idled softly, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. She hesitated, pretending to check her phone while sneaking glances at the vehicle. After a few minutes, it drove off, but not before slowing down beside her as if studying her face. By the time she reached the cafe, her palms were sweaty and her mind raced with questions. Who were these people? How did they know where she lived? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go to silence her? Determined not to let fear paralyze her, Emily decided to take precautions. She changed her daily routines, avoided staying out late, and started carrying pepper spray everywhere she went. Still, paranoia lingered. One evening, while reviewing surveillance footage of Mark and Ryan meeting with shady characters outside a rundown warehouse, Emily heard faint footsteps outside her door. Her breath hitched. She tiptoed to the peephole and peeked out, but the hallway was empty. Just as she was about to dismiss it as her imagination, she spotted a folded piece of paper slipped under her door. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded it. Written in block letters were 3 chilling words. "We're watching you." This was no longer a game. Emily realized that confronting Mark and Ryan directly wouldn't be enough. They were too powerful, too entrenched in the system. If she wanted to bring them down, she needed help. Real help from someone with authority and resources beyond her reach. That's when she remembered a conversation she'd had months earlier with Sarah, a childhood friend who now worked as a paralegal. Sarah had mentioned knowing someone connected to federal law enforcement. Desperate, Emily called Sarah and explained everything: the bribes, the frame-ups, the threats. To her relief, Sarah agreed to put her in touch with the right people. A week later, Emily found herself sitting in a dimly lit diner, nervously sipping coffee as she waited for her contact to arrive. When a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit walked in and introduced himself as Agent Carter from the FBI, she almost couldn't believe it. Here she was, a regular citizen, sitting across from a federal agent discussing one of the biggest corruption cases in recent history. Agent Carter listened intently as Emily recounted her findings, occasionally jotting down notes. By the end of their meeting, he assured her that the FBI would look into the matter thoroughly. What Emily didn't realize at the time was that this decision would set off a chain reaction far greater than she could have imagined. Within days, a team of undercover agents infiltrated the corrupt network, posing as criminals eager to strike deals with Mark and Ryan. Surveillance teams monitored their every move, capturing incriminating conversations and transactions. Meanwhile, Emily continued playing her role perfectly, feeding false information to the officers under the guise of seeking revenge for Alex's arrest. The operation moved swiftly, but so did the stakes. One afternoon, while leaving a grocery store, Emily noticed the same black SUV tailing her again. This time, she didn't waste a second. Ducking into a narrow alleyway, she zigzagged through side streets, her heart pounding like a drum. Eventually, she managed to lose them near a busy intersection. Exhausted and shaken, she called Agent Carter, who advised her to lay low until further notice. For her own safety, they arranged for her to stay at a secure location temporarily. Despite the mounting pressure, Emily refused to back down. She knew the risks, but she also understood the importance of what she was doing. If she succeeded, she wouldn't just be saving her brother. She'd be freeing an entire town from the grip of terror. Each new piece of evidence brought her closer to justice. Each revelation chipped away at the fortress of corruption surrounding Mark and Ryan. But even as the FBI tightened its net around the corrupt duo, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was still ahead. The pieces were falling into place, yes, but the climax of this battle remained shrouded in mystery. Little did she know, the final act would unfold in a courtroom and leave everyone speechless. For now, though, Emily focused on surviving each day, gathering evidence and trusting that the truth would eventually prevail. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but she had come too far to turn back. The FBI's involvement marked a turning point in Emily's fight against corruption. With their vast resources and expertise, the operation transformed from a lone citizen's desperate crusade into a meticulously planned mission to dismantle one of the most entrenched criminal networks in the town's history. For weeks, agents worked tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering intelligence, setting up surveillance, and devising strategies to catch Mark and Ryan red-handed. Every detail mattered, every conversation recorded, every transaction tracked, every movement monitored. And at the heart of it all was Emily, whose courage and determination had sparked this entire investigation. Agent Carter became Emily's primary point of contact within the FBI. A seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, he quickly earned her trust. He made sure she understood the risks involved, but also reassured her that they wouldn't let anything happen to her. "You've done more than anyone could ask for," he told her during one of their meetings. "Now it's our job to finish what you started." Despite his calm demeanor, Emily could sense the urgency in his voice. Time was running out. They needed to act fast before Mark and Ryan grew suspicious or disappeared altogether. The plan was simple, yet daring. Undercover agents would pose as wealthy criminals eager to strike deals with Mark and Ryan. These fake criminals would offer bribes in exchange for protection or favors, luring the corrupt officers into committing crimes on camera. Meanwhile, Emily would continue feeding them false information, making it seem like she was working with them instead of against them. It was a dangerous game, but necessary if they wanted to gather irrefutable evidence. One evening, Agent Carter called Emily with exciting news. "We've set up a meeting," he said. "Tomorrow night at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Mark and Ryan will be there to negotiate a deal with one of our undercover agents. We need you to stay close by, just in case things don't go according to plan." Emily nodded nervously. She knew how critical this moment was. If everything went smoothly, they'd have all the proof they needed to bring down not only Mark and Ryan, but also the powerful figures backing them. But if something went wrong, if the officers suspected foul play, it could put everyone involved in grave danger. The next day felt like an eternity. Emily spent hours pacing her temporary safe house, rehearsing what she would say if Mark and Ryan contacted her unexpectedly. Outside, FBI agents prepared for the sting operation, positioning themselves strategically around the warehouse. Hidden cameras were installed inside, capturing every angle of the room. Microphones disguised as ordinary objects ensured no word went unheard. By nightfall, the stage was set. At exactly 9 p.m., Mark and Ryan arrived at the warehouse, their confident strides betraying none of the paranoia that should have gripped them. They were met by Agent Lewis, one of the FBI's top undercover operatives. Disguised as a wealthy businessman named Victor Kane, he greeted them warmly, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Victor explained that he ran a lucrative smuggling operation and needed police protection to ensure smooth deliveries. In return, he offered a hefty bribe, cash up front, with promises of more to come. Mark and Ryan barely hesitated. Greed gleamed in their eyes as they accepted the envelope stuffed with fake bills. Their arrogance knew no bounds. "Consider it done," Mark said with a smirk, leaning back in his chair. "Just make sure you keep us happy and we won't have any problems." Unbeknownst to them, every word was being recorded. Cameras hidden in the walls captured their smug expressions as they discussed logistics, casually mentioning names of other officials they worked with. It was damning evidence, painting a clear picture of a network built on bribery, intimidation, and deceit. As the meeting progressed, Emily waited anxiously nearby, listening to updates via earpiece. Her role was minimal tonight, to provide backup, if needed, but the tension gnawed at her nerves. What if something went wrong? What if Mark and Ryan realized they were being played? Each passing minute felt like an hour. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the meeting concluded. Mark and Ryan left the warehouse, oblivious to the trap closing in around them. Moments later, Agent Carter gave the signal. Dozens of FBI agents stormed the area surrounding the duo before they could react. Handcuffs clicked into place and the officers' faces twisted in shock and disbelief. "What the hell is this?" Ryan shouted, struggling against the agents holding him. "You can't do this." "Oh, we can," Agent Carter replied calmly, stepping forward. "And we just did." Back at headquarters, the FBI team celebrated quietly. They had pulled off one of the biggest sting operations in recent memory, catching not only Mark and Ryan but also implicating several high-ranking officials tied to their network. Evidence poured in from multiple sources, recorded conversations, financial records, and witness testimonies, all pointing to a web of corruption that extended far beyond the small town. For Emily, however, the relief was bittersweet. While, she was thrilled to see justice served, she couldn't shake the memories of everything she'd endured. The threats, the fear, the sleepless nights. Sitting alone in her safe house, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about Alex, still waiting in jail for his name to be cleared. She thought about the countless others whose lives had been ruined by Mark and Ryan's actions. And she thought about the future, a future where perhaps she could help prevent such atrocities from happening again. But the fight wasn't over yet. Arresting Mark and Ryan was only the first step. Now came the hard part, ensuring they faced consequences for their crimes. Trials loomed ahead, filled with legal battles and media scrutiny. Emily knew the road to justice would be long and arduous, but she also knew she couldn't give up, not when so much was at stake. Little did she realize, though, that the courtroom drama awaiting her would take an unexpected turn, one that would leave the entire nation talking for years to come. For now, however, Emily focused on the present, savoring the small victory while preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. Justice was closer than ever, and she intended to see it through, to the very end. The trial of Detective Mark Rivers and Officer Ryan Cole was the most anticipated event in the town's recent history. For weeks leading up to it, the case dominated headlines, sparking heated debates on social media, talk shows, and even dinner tables. People were divided. Some believed the officers deserved a fair chance to defend themselves, while others argued that their guilt was undeniable. Regardless of opinions, one thing was certain: everyone wanted to see how this high-stakes legal battle would unfold. On the day of the trial, the courtroom buzzed with energy. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras clicking furiously as spectators filed in. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. Mark and Ryan sat at the defendant's table, flanked by their expensive defense attorneys. Their expressions betrayed no hint of remorse or fear, only arrogance. They leaned, back in their chairs, whispering jokes and exchanging smirks, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of the situation. After all, they had faced scrutiny before and always managed to walk away unscathed. Why should this time be any different? Emily arrived early, her heart pounding as she took a seat in the front row. She had waited so long for this moment, the culmination of months of sacrifice, danger, and relentless determination. Beside her sat Alex, who had been temporarily released pending the outcome of the trial. He looked pale but resolute, gripping his sister's hand tightly for support. Behind them, other victims of Mark and Ryan's corruption filled the benches, their faces etched with a mix of hope and anxiety. This wasn't just about justice for Emily and Alex. It was about vindication for an entire community that had suffered under the officers' tyranny. As the proceedings began, the prosecution laid out its case with precision. Prosecutor Lisa Hartman, a seasoned lawyer known for her sharp wit and unyielding dedication, presented evidence piece by piece. Surveillance. Footage from the sting operation played on a large screen, showing Mark and Ryan accepting bribes without hesitation. Audio recordings captured their incriminating conversations, their voices dripping with greed and entitlement. Financial records traced illicit payments to city officials, exposing the depth of their corruption. Witness testimonies followed, each one painting a vivid picture of the officers' abuses of power. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Mark and Ryan remained defiant. During cross-examinations, they smirked at witnesses, rolling their eyes and muttering sarcastic remarks under their breath. When asked directly about their involvement in planting evidence or taking bribes, they denied everything, accusing the FBI of fabricating lies to ruin their careers. Their defense team echoed this narrative, arguing that the undercover operation was nothing more than entrapment, a setup designed to frame two innocent officers. "These men are being scapegoated," the lead defense attorney declared dramatically, pointing a finger at the jury. "They're victims of a witch hunt." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, some nodding in agreement while others shook their heads in disbelief. It was clear that the defense was playing to the emotions of the jury, attempting to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the FBI's investigation. And for a moment, it seemed to work. Doubt lingered in the air, palpable and suffocating. But Prosecutor Hartman wasn't done yet. With steely resolve, she dismantled the defense's arguments one by one. She highlighted inconsistencies in Mark and Ryan's statements, pointed out flaws in their alibis, and emphasized the sheer volume of evidence against them. By the end of her closing argument, the mood in the room had shifted. Even the skeptical jurors appeared to be swayed, their expressions thoughtful and serious. Mark and Ryan, however, remained unfazed. As the judge called for a recess before delivering the final verdict, they exchanged cocky grins. "Looks like we're celebrating tonight," Mark whispered confidently to Ryan. His words carried through the tense silence of the courtroom, earning glares from those around him. To them, this wasn't just another court case, it was personal. Every insult, every bribe, every life ruined by their actions weighed heavily in the balance. Yet here they were, laughing as if none of it mattered. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled to capture reactions from the crowd. Some expressed cautious optimism, believing justice might finally prevail. Others voiced concerns that Mark and Ryan's connections and charm could sway the jury. Amidst the chaos, Emily stood quietly, her arms crossed as she watched the commotion. She felt a strange mix of hope and dread. The evidence was undeniable, but she knew better than anyone how powerful people often found ways to evade accountability. Would today be different? Or would the system fail once again? Just then, something unexpected happened. A black SUV pulled up outside the courthouse, its arrival drawing curious stares. The vehicle parked near the entrance, and moments later, a tall, commanding figure stepped out. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, her presence commanded instant attention. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people recognized her immediately. It was none other than the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation herself. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that—" "Yes, it's her. What's she doing here?" Even the reporters paused mid-interview to gawk at the unexpected guest. Cameras flashed wildly as the director made her way toward the courthouse steps. Her expression was calm but authoritative, exuding a quiet strength that silenced the noise around her. Without saying a word, she entered the building, flanked by several agents who moved with military precision. Inside the courtroom, the recess was coming to an end. Spectators returned to their seats, unaware of the bombshell waiting outside. When the judge re-entered and called the court back to order, a hush fell over the room. Before the proceedings could resume, a bailiff approached the bench and whispered something to the judge. The judge's eyebrows shot up, and he nodded solemnly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, addressing the packed courtroom, "we have a special guest who has requested permission to address the court. Please welcome Director Evelyn Monroe of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room froze. Even Mark and Ryan stopped smirking, their faces pale with confusion. What was happening? Why was the FBI director here? As Evelyn Monroe walked to the podium, all eyes were glued to her. Her voice rang out clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I am here today not only as the head of the FBI but as a representative of justice itself," she began, her tone firm yet measured. "What you have witnessed in this courtroom is not just a trial of two individuals. It is a reckoning for a system that has allowed corruption to fester unchecked. These men," she gestured toward Mark and Ryan, "have betrayed the trust placed in them by the public. They have abused their power, destroyed lives, and tarnished the badge they swore to uphold." Her gaze locked onto Mark and Ryan, who squirmed uncomfortably under her piercing stare. "You may think your influence will protect you," she continued, "but let me make one thing absolutely clear. No one is above the law, not now, not ever." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. No one had expected such a direct confrontation. Mark and Ryan's bravado crumbled, replaced by visible unease. For the first time since the trial began, they looked genuinely afraid. Evelyn went on to explain the scope of the FBI's investigation, detailing how it had uncovered ties between Mark, Ryan, and organized crime syndicates across multiple states. The implications were staggering, implicating not only the officers but also the higher-ups who had enabled their crimes. By the time she finished speaking, the courtroom was deathly silent. Even the defense attorneys seemed stunned, unsure of how to respond. When Evelyn stepped away from the podium, the judge thanked her and adjourned the court briefly to allow everyone to process what had just transpired. Outside, reporters clamored for statements, but Evelyn offered none. Her message had already been delivered. and it left an indelible mark on everyone present. For Emily, watching the scene unfold was surreal. She had never imagined the FBI director herself would intervene in such a dramatic fashion. But as she glanced at Alex, tears welled up in her eyes. Justice was within reach, and this time, there would be no escaping it. Whatever verdict awaited, one thing was certain: Mark and Ryan's days of impunity were over. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the judge reconvened the session. Every eye remained fixed on Director Evelyn Monroe, whose unexpected appearance had turned the trial into something far more monumental than anyone could have anticipated. Even Mark and Ryan, who moments ago had been smirking and exchanging jokes, now sat stiffly in their seats, their faces pale and beads of sweat forming on their foreheads. It was as if the weight of her words had physically pinned them down, robbing them of their usual bravado. Evelyn's presence wasn't just symbolic, it was a statement. She stood there, not merely as the head of the FBI, but as a symbol of authority that even the most corrupt individuals couldn't ignore. Her speech had left an indelible mark, stripping away any illusion of invincibility Mark and Ryan might have harbored. For years, they had operated under the belief that their connections and badges made them untouchable. But now, with Evelyn standing before them, it became painfully clear that their empire of lies was crumbling beneath their feet. As the proceedings resumed, Prosecutor Lisa Hartman seized the opportunity to drive home the final nails in the coffin. With renewed vigor, she revisited the evidence, emphasizing how each piece pointed directly to Mark and Ryan's guilt. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice steady and commanding, "you've heard from witnesses who've suffered because of these men. You've seen videos and recordings proving their crimes beyond a shadow of a doubt. And now, you've witnessed the highest levels of law enforcement confirm what we already know. They are guilty." Her words resonated deeply, especially after Evelyn's powerful intervention. The jury members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from skepticism to resolve. One by one, they seemed to come to terms with the enormity of the case before them. This wasn't just about convicting two corrupt cops. It was about sending a message that justice would prevail no matter how deeply entrenched corruption ran. Mark and Ryan's defense team scrambled to counter the tide, attempting to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the FBI's investigation. Their lead attorney argued passionately, claiming that the undercover operation had entrapped his clients and violated their rights. "This is nothing more than a setup," he exclaimed, slamming his fist on the table for emphasis. "My clients were coerced into committing these acts. They're victims of circumstance, but the argument fell flat." After Evelyn's testimony, which laid bare the extent of the officers' involvement in organized crime and systemic corruption, such defenses sounded hollow, even desperate. The jury appeared unmoved, their faces reflecting growing frustration with the defense's attempts to deflect responsibility. Throughout the trial, Emily sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched the drama unfold with a mix of emotions: hope, fear, and a deep sense of vindication. For so long, she had carried the burden of exposing Mark and Ryan's crimes alone. Now, surrounded by federal agents, prosecutors, and a community united in its demand for justice, she felt a profound sense of relief. Still, she couldn't shake the lingering question: would the verdict reflect the truth? Finally, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. As the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, the tension in the room reached its peak. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the words that would seal Mark and Ryan's fate. "On all counts," the foreperson announced, her voice cutting through the silence, "we find the defendants guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by spontaneous applause. Victims who had endured years of suffering hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces. Emily clutched Alex's hand, overcome with emotion. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale fully. Justice had been served, or so it seemed. However, Evelyn Monroe wasn't finished yet. Just as the judge prepared to adjourn the court, she rose once again, signaling for attention. The room fell silent, every person leaning forward in anticipation. What more could she possibly reveal? "Before we conclude," Evelyn began, her tone calm but authoritative. "There is one final matter I must address." She paused, letting the suspense build. Then, turning toward Mark and Ryan, she delivered a revelation that stunned everyone present. "Gentlemen, your actions do not exist in isolation. Through our investigation, we uncovered links between you and several high-ranking officials, not only within this town but also at state and federal levels. These individuals will face charges accordingly." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, cameras flashed nonstop, and murmurs filled the air. Mark and Ryan looked as though they'd been struck by lightning, their faces contorted in shock and disbelief. Their arrogance vanished entirely, replaced by sheer panic. They weren't just facing prison sentences, they were implicating others far more powerful than themselves. Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering. "We have already begun arresting those involved. Let this serve as a warning to anyone else complicit in corruption. Your time is up. No badge, no title, no amount of money can shield you from accountability." For Emily, hearing these words brought both satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because justice was finally catching up to those who had caused so much harm. Sorrow because the scope of the corruption was far greater than she had imagined. It wasn't just Mark and Ryan. It was an entire system rotting from within. Yet, despite the overwhelming scale of the problem, she found solace in knowing that change was possible. If people like her refused to stay silent, if organizations like the FBI stepped in when needed, then perhaps the future held hope for a cleaner, fairer world. As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed around Evelyn, firing questions about the wider investigation. She offered few details, choosing instead to reiterate her commitment to rooting out corruption wherever it existed. Meanwhile, Mark and Ryan were led away in handcuffs, their heads bowed in shame. Gone were the cocky grins and dismissive attitudes. They were reduced to mere shadows of the men they once thought they were. Emily lingered behind, watching as Alex embraced her tightly. He whispered his gratitude, his voice choked with emotion. "You did this," he said. "You saved me. And so many others." She shook her head, smiling softly. "Not just me," she replied. "It took all of us working together." Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the crowd gathered below. People cheered, holding signs that read, "Justice prevails," and "No more corruption." Among them stood Emily, her heart swelling, with pride and determination. This victory was significant, but she knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be battles to wage, injustices to expose, and systems to reform. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of triumph, a reminder that courage and persistence could move mountains, and somewhere deep inside, she felt a spark ignite. Perhaps this was just the beginning of her journey, not just as a sister, fighting for her brother's freedom, but as a champion for justice everywhere. The guilty verdict marked the end of Mark Rivers and Ryan Cole's reign of terror, but it was only the beginning of a larger reckoning. As news of their conviction spread, shockwaves rippled through the town and beyond. What had started as a local scandal quickly escalated into a national conversation about corruption, accountability, and the need for systemic reform. The courtroom drama that unfolded during the trial became legendary, with Evelyn Monroe's unexpected appearance serving as the defining moment that sealed the officer's fate. Mark and Ryan were sentenced to decades behind bars, their once proud badges reduced to mere relics of their shattered reputations. During the sentencing hearing, victims were given the opportunity to speak. One by one, they stood before the court, recounting how these two men had destroyed lives, manipulated justice, and left scars that would never fully heal. Emily listened intently as each story poured forth, stories of lost jobs, broken families, and stolen futures. Though painful to hear, these testimonies reinforced her belief that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about validation. For years, these victims had been silenced, dismissed, or ignored. Now, finally, their voices mattered. When it was Emily's turn to address the court, she took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edges, but her voice remained steady. "This isn't just about my brother," she began, glancing at Alex seated beside her. "It's about every person who has ever felt powerless against someone wearing a badge. It's about every family torn apart because they dared to stand up to corruption. And it's about proving that no matter how strong the system seems, truth and courage can still prevail." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from those in attendance. Even the judge appeared moved, pausing briefly before delivering his final remarks. "This case serves as a stark reminder that authority must always be accompanied by integrity," he declared. "Those who abuse their power betray not only the public trust but also the very principles upon which our society is built. Today, we send a clear message. Such behavior will not be tolerated." As the gavel came down, sealing Mark and Ryan's sentences, the courtroom erupted in applause. Outside, crowds gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice wins" and "No more dirty cops." Reporters scrambled to capture reactions, broadcasting live updates to audiences across the country. Social media lit up with hashtags celebrating the verdict, while opinion pieces praised Emily's bravery and the FBI's intervention. For many, this trial represented more than just a legal victory. It symbolized hope for a better future. But the fallout didn't stop there. Thanks to Evelyn Monroe's revelations, investigations expanded to include the high-ranking officials implicated in the corruption network. Arrests followed swiftly, sending shockwaves through political circles. Some resigned immediately, while others attempted to deny involvement. But evidence mounted, leaving them with nowhere to hide. It became evident that Mark and Ryan weren't isolated bad apples. They were part of a much larger rotten tree. The scandal forced lawmakers to introduce sweeping reforms aimed at increasing transparency, strengthening oversight, and holding public servants accountable for misconduct. For Emily, the aftermath brought both relief and reflection. On one hand, she felt immense pride knowing that her efforts had sparked meaningful change. Alex's name was cleared, allowing him to rebuild his life free from the stigma of false accusations. Other victims found closure, empowered by the knowledge that their tormentors would face consequences. But on the other hand, Emily couldn't ignore the toll the ordeal had taken on her. Sleepless nights, constant fear, and relentless pressure had left their mark. She realized that fighting for justice required resilience, not just physically but emotionally as well. Determined to channel her experiences into something positive, Emily decided to pursue a career in advocacy. Inspired by her journey, she enrolled in law school, eager to learn how to navigate the complexities of the legal system and amplify marginalized voices. Her goal was simple yet ambitious: to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she and countless others had suffered under corrupt systems. Along the way, she partnered with organizations dedicated to police reform, speaking at conferences, and sharing her story to inspire others to take action. Meanwhile, Evelyn Monroe's bold move during the trial earned widespread acclaim. News outlets hailed her as a hero, praising her willingness to step into the spotlight and confront corruption head-on. In interviews, she emphasized the importance of collaboration between citizens and law enforcement, urging communities to remain vigilant and report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. Her leadership inspired confidence, reminding people that institutions could still work for the greater good when guided by integrity and purpose. Years passed, and the town slowly began to heal. Streets once dominated by fear now buzzed with renewed optimism. Businesses reopened, children played freely again, and residents engaged openly with law enforcement, many of whom had worked tirelessly to distance themselves from Mark and Ryan's legacy. Trust was fragile but rebuilding, thanks in large part to initiatives aimed at fostering transparency and accountability. Emily's story continued to resonate long after the trial ended. Documentaries chronicled her fight against corruption, highlighting the courage it took to challenge powerful adversaries. Schools invited her to speak, using her journey as an example of perseverance and civic responsibility. Even Hollywood expressed interest in adapting her experiences into a film, though Emily insisted on maintaining creative control to ensure authenticity. Looking back, Emily often reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful day when she first discovered Alex's arrest. At the time, she hadn't imagined herself standing in a courtroom addressing a judge, or becoming a symbol of resistance against injustice. Yet here she was, years later, proof that ordinary individuals could achieve extraordinary things when driven by conviction and supported by community. One evening, as she walked through the park where she used to play as a child, Emily paused to watch the sunset. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the town she loved. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel gratitude. For Alex, for the FBI agents who believed in her cause, and for everyone who had stood alongside her in pursuit of justice. There would always be challenges ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. As long as people refused to remain silent, change was possible. And so, Emily Carter's story became more than just a tale of triumph over adversity. It became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could shine through. Whether battling corrupt cops or advocating for systemic reform, she proved that courage, determination, and unity could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Justice might sometimes seem elusive, but with persistence and heart, it was within reach for everyone.